The night was cold in Chicago, lit only by the city lights reflecting off the imposing buildings. Marcelo, with icy eyes and a heavy heart, observed the landscape from the top of his luxury apartment. He recalled the heated argument he had had with Rebecca, his wife, days ago. She begged for a trip to Europe, something he vehemently denied, prioritizing his work and commitments. The discovery of the betrayal was a crushing blow. A message on her cell phone, a chance meeting reported by a friend, and everything came to light. Rebecca not only betrayed his trust, but did so with the disdain of someone who no longer cared. However, Marcelo was not a man to stand idly by in the face of betrayal. His plan for revenge quickly began to form. He would hand-pick the right moment and person to cause the deepest pain possible. And so, he extended the invitation to Rebecca's closest friend, Laura, a charming woman who is equally dissatisfied with her love life. With a cold smile, Marcelo prepared for his own trip to Europe. This time, he would be accompanied, but not by Rebecca. The fate he reserved for his wife would be much more painful and humiliating. As he boarded the plane, he couldn't help but think of how Rebecca would react to finding out he was leaving with her best friend. And so, as the plane took off, he knew the revenge game was just beginning. Marcelo Leone was a successful businessman in Chicago, known for his cunning and coolness in the corporate world. By his early 40s, he had built a financial empire that allowed him to live in a luxury apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. His routine was meticulously planned, every detail calculated to maximize efficiency and profit. He married Rebecca 10 years ago, a woman of classic beauty and keen intelligence, whose presence was noted at any social event they attended. Rebecca, in turn, was an enigmatic figure. Graduated in literature, she has always had a passion for travel and foreign cultures, something that Marcelo, focused on his career, never fully understood. She organized charity events and was the perfect hostess, but within her there was a growing restlessness. Marcelo's refusal to grant his request for a trip to Europe was the final straw that broke a glass already full of frustrations accumulated over the years. The relationship between the two had become a monotonous routine, where dialogues were scarce and moments of affection were rare. Marcelo was always absorbed in his business, while Rebecca wallowed in her silent dissatisfaction. The city of Chicago, with its vibrant nightlife and impressive architecture, served as the backdrop to a relationship that was on the wane. The busy streets, elegant bars and exclusive restaurants were a contrast to the coldness that dominated Marcelo and Rebecca's home. Laura, Rebecca's best friend, was a free-spirited woman. Working as a photographer, she had a keen eye for beauty in life's small details. Single and disillusioned with love, Laura found comfort in her friendship with Rebecca, often being the shoulder on which she cried her sorrows. Laura knew Rebecca's frustrations well and, in moments of confidence, had already heard about Marcelo's lack of attention and affection. Marcelo, even though he was a busy businessman, was not insensitive. He noticed the growing distance between him and Rebecca, but he didn't know how to deal with it. The request for the trip to Europe was a reflection of Rebecca's desire for something new, a desperate attempt to revive what was once a relationship full of passion and promise. However, for Marcelo, giving in to this demand seemed like a waste of time and a diversion from his goals. He traveled the world on business but never for pleasure, and the idea of a romantic trip seemed superfluous. Marcelo and Rebecca's apartment was a reflection of his personality, modern, sophisticated and impeccably decorated, but cold and devoid of any personal touch that would indicate a shared life with someone. Rebecca, with her warmer, more artistic taste, could only add little touches of color and art here and there, without ever truly transforming the space into a home. The physical and emotional distance was palpable. Marcelo had a restricted circle of friends, all of whom were business partners or professional contacts. He saw no need to socialize beyond what was necessary. Rebecca, on the other hand, was charismatic and had a diverse group of friends, including Laura, with whom she shared a special bond. Rebecca's social gatherings were always lively, but lately, she felt like she was just playing a role, a cover for her unhappiness. Marcelo's decision to invite Laura on the trip to Europe was calculated, cold and meticulous. He knew that Laura had a soft spot for him, something he had never explored before out of respect for his wife. But now, Rebecca's betrayal had severed any bond of loyalty he felt. Laura's choice was not only revenge against Rebecca, but also a way to show her that he still had control of the situation. Laura, despite her initial hesitation, accepted the invitation. She was aware of the tension between Marcelo and Rebecca, but the prospect of adventure, and perhaps something more, seduced her. Chicago, with its frenetic pace and constant opportunities, was the perfect setting for this drama of love and betrayal. Nights in the city were lit by neon, full of people looking for fun and escapism. Marcelo and Laura, when planning the trip, met more frequently, disguising their meetings as casual meetings to discuss photography, a passion that Marcelo pretended to have recently acquired. Each meeting was another step towards realizing Marcelo's plan, and Laura, with her energy and enthusiasm, began to see in Marcelo not just a cold businessman, but an intriguing man. The day of departure for Europe arrived quickly. Rebecca was oblivious to Marcelo and Laura's preparations, busy with her own thoughts and plans. The discovery of Marcelo's betrayal was devastating, but she still didn't know about the plan he had devised. When she finally found out that Marcelo was away, she thought he was on business as usual. The surprise was to come. At the airport, Marcelo and Laura looked like a couple in love, ready for a new adventure. The lights of the city in the distance mixed with the lights of the airport, creating an almost cinematic scene. Marcelo felt a mixture of excitement and revenge, while Laura was nervous but excited. They boarded the plane with the certainty that this trip would change everything, but for very different reasons. Marcelo's revenge was just beginning, and he was determined to make Rebecca pay for every moment of pain she caused him. The trip began with an air of normality that gradually transformed into something more intense. Marcelo and Laura disembarked in Paris, the city of lights, ready to dive into an experience that promised to be unforgettable. From the beginning, Marcelo was determined to make every moment of this trip a silent tribute to his revenge. He knew Rebecca was about to discover the truth and he wanted her pain to be as intense as his. As they walked through the streets of Paris, Laura was dazzled by every detail. His camera captured moments of beauty that escaped the common eye. Marcelo, on the other hand, was focused. He made a point of posting photos on social media, tagging Laura in all of them. The photos were carefully chosen to appear intimate and romantic. He knew these images would reach Rebecca, and her reaction was something he awaited with dark pleasure. Rebecca, back in Chicago, began to notice Marcelo's absence more acutely. The house felt emptier, and without the usual noise of business meetings and conference calls, she felt more isolated than ever. His anguish increased when he saw the first photos of Marcelo and Laura together in Paris. At first, she didn't want to believe it. Laura was her longtime friend, someone she trusted completely. Anger and pain began to build inside her as she tried to understand what was happening. Marcelo and Laura continued their journey, now exploring the Tuscan vineyards. Every day was a new adventure, every night a new opportunity for Marcelo to intensify his revenge. He became increasingly affectionate with Laura, fueling her hopes and at the same time fueling Rebecca's resentment. Laura, in turn, was increasingly involved, starting to have real feelings for Marcelo, without suspecting that she was part of a much bigger plan. The days turned into weeks and the journey seemed to have no end. They headed to Greece, where the stunning landscapes and crystal-clear sea looked like a movie set. Marcelo took every opportunity to create moments that would leave a lasting impression on Laura and Rebecca. The seaside dinners, the sunset walks, everything was calculated to maximize the emotional impact. Rebecca was now in a state of confusion and pain. She confronted Laura through a message, but Laura, already deeply involved with Marcelo, responded evasively, further increasing Rebecca's anguish. Social media became a daily torture for Rebecca, who saw each new post from Marcelo and Laura as proof of her betrayal and confirmation that she had been replaced. The tension increased every day. Marcelo began to notice that Laura was more attached, more affectionate, and this gave him a mixed feeling of satisfaction and repulsion. He knew he was manipulating feelings, and for a moment he almost felt guilty. But the memory of Rebecca's betrayal kept him firm in his purpose. Revenge, for him, was a form of justice. On a warm night on the island of Santorini, Marcelo organized a special dinner for Laura. The ambience was perfect, a table for two, candles and a stunning view of the Aegean Sea. Laura was overjoyed, believing that this was the moment that Marcelo would finally admit his feelings for her. However, Marcelo had other plans. During dinner, he started talking about Rebecca in a way he never had before. He revealed small details about their marriage, always highlighting the happy moments they had. Laura began to realize that, despite everything, Rebecca was still an important part of Marcelo's life. The journey continued its course and, at each destination, Marcelo continued his game of manipulation. In Venice, he took Laura on a gondola ride, something Rebecca had always dreamed of doing. The photos from this trip were the most painful for Rebecca. She felt like her life was falling apart as she watched from afar her husband and her best friend living what seemed like a fairy tale. The days in Venice were marked by increasing tension. Laura began to realize that something was wrong. The little references to Rebecca, the way Marcelo seemed distant at times, it all started to weigh on his mind. But before she could confront him, Marcelo decided to return to Paris, where the circle of his revenge would be completed. Back in Paris, Marcelo made a point of taking Laura to the places he knew Rebecca always wanted to visit. Every photo, every post, was a stab in Rebecca's heart. He knew her pain was reaching its peak, and that motivated him to keep going. Finally, Marcelo decided to end the trip with a grand event. He planned a gala party at a luxurious Parisian hotel, inviting friends and acquaintances who were in Europe. Laura, stunning in a red dress, was the center of attention alongside Marcelo. Rebecca, when she saw the photos from the party, knew at that moment that her marriage was over. Marcelo's revenge was almost complete. He had destroyed what was left of his marriage and deeply hurt his wife. But the satisfaction he expected to feel was replaced by a growing emptiness. Laura, on the other hand, was confused and began to suspect Marcelo's true intentions. On the flight back to Chicago, Marcelo began to reflect on everything he had done. He wondered if revenge had really been worth it, or if he had become the very thing he despised most. Laura, sitting next to him, was still delighted with the trip, but doubt was beginning to infiltrate her thoughts. Back in Chicago, Marcelo felt a restlessness he couldn't explain. He had orchestrated every detail of the trip, manipulating Laura and Rebecca like pieces on a chessboard, but upon returning, he realized that something was out of place. Laura, still ecstatic about the trip, seemed closer to him than ever, while Rebecca, somehow, began to plan her own form of retaliation. Rebecca, devastated by the discovery of the betrayal and the images that tormented her days, decided to confront Marcelo. She knew she needed to understand why he had done this and, more importantly, how she could regain control of her own life. With a plan in mind, she waited for him at home, in the apartment that now felt more like an emotional battlefield than a home. When Marcelo entered the apartment, he found Rebecca sitting in the living room, surrounded by photos of his trip with Laura. She had printed out every image Marcelo posted on social media and spread them across the floor, creating a mosaic of pain and betrayal. He looked at her, surprised but not shaken. "So you're here," Rebecca said, her voice as cold as ice. "I think we should talk." Marcelo closed the door behind him and walked slowly to the center of the room, looking at the photos on the floor. "It looks like you've been keeping yourself busy," he replied, his voice controlled. Rebecca stood up, fury burning in her eyes. "What were you thinking, Marcelo?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "Did you really think you could get away with this?" He stared at her, his face expressionless. "I did what needed to be done, Rebecca. You betrayed me first." Rebecca gave a bitter laugh. And you thought the best way to deal with this was to destroy me and my friendship with Laura? How could you be so cruel? Marcelo felt a thread of regret pass through him, but he quickly pushed it away. Cruel? Perhaps. But I needed you to feel the same pain I felt. And believe me, Rebecca, I did it. Rebecca took a deep breath, trying to control her tears. And now, Marcelo? What did you gain from all this? Do you think you can continue living like this without consequences? Before he could respond, the apartment door opened again. Laura entered, surprised to see Rebecca there. His eyes widened when he saw the photos spread across the floor. What's going on here? Asked Laura, her voice trembling. Rebecca turned to her, her face hardened. We're sorting out some things, Laura. Maybe you should sit down. Laura looked at Marcelo, looking for an answer, but he just shrugged. She sat on the couch, feeling the tension in the air. Laura, Rebecca began, her voice firm. I thought you were my friend. How could you do this to me? Laura tried to defend herself, but words failed her. She looked at Marcelo, who remained silent. Rebecca, began Laura, but Rebecca raised her hand, interrupting her. I don't want to hear your excuses, Laura. You knew exactly what you were doing. Marcelo finally broke the silence. Laura, Rebecca, this isn't going anywhere. What has been done is done. Now we need to move on. Rebecca looked at him in disbelief. Move on. As if nothing had happened. You destroyed our marriage, Marcelo. There is no going back. Laura, feeling cornered, stood up. I didn't know he was doing it for revenge, Rebecca. I thought he was falling in love with me. Rebecca shook her head. Laura, you were just a piece in his game. Nothing more. Marcelo sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. Maybe we'd better get this over with, he said tiredly. Rebecca, I know I made a mistake. But you were also wrong. Maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways. Rebecca felt a lump in her throat, but she knew he was right. They had reached a point of no return. She looked at Laura, who was visibly shaken. And you, Laura? What are you going to do now? Laura looked at the floor, feeling lost. I don't know. I need time to think. Marcelo approached Rebecca, holding her hands. Rebecca, I'm sorry about everything. I really feel it. But there is no way to fix this. She pulled her hands back, feeling the pain and anger mix inside her. No, Marcelo. There isn't. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. With those words, Rebecca turned and left the apartment, leaving Marcelo and Laura alone. The silence that followed was crushing. Laura looked at Marcelo, tears running down her face. And now, Marcelo? What are we going to do? He shook his head, not knowing the answer. I don't know, Laura. I really don't know. As they stood there in silence, they both knew that what was left of their relationships had been destroyed. Marcelo's revenge, although satisfying at first, now seemed empty and purposeless. He had lost everything, and in the process, hurt the people who mattered most to him. The following days were a blur for Marcelo. He tried to resume his work routine, but the feeling of emptiness persisted. Laura, in turn, turned away from him, unable to deal with the reality of what had happened. They had shared intense moments during the trip, but now, everything seemed meaningless. Marcelo began to realize that his revenge, although meticulously planned, had been a mistake. Not only did he destroy his marriage, but he also lost a friend and potentially something more with Laura. He needed a way to make things right, or at least find some kind of redemption. He decided to reach out to Rebecca, hoping for one last conversation that could bring some kind of closure. When he arrived at her house, he felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. Rebecca met him at the door, her face marked by tiredness and sadness. What do you want, Marcelo? she asked, her voice cold. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Rebecca, I need to apologize. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Rebecca looked at him for a moment, before stepping back and opening the door for him to enter. Let's talk, then, she said, leading him to the living room. They sat facing each other, silence heavy in the air. Rebecca, I know I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know that I was acting out of anger and pain. I felt like you betrayed me, and it destroyed me inside. Rebecca sighed, running a hand through her hair. Marcelo, I understand that you were hurt. But what you did was cruel. You hurt me in ways I never thought possible. He nodded, feeling guilt weigh on his shoulders. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Rebecca looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. Marcelo, I need time. Time to heal and understand what to do next. He nodded again, understanding the gravity of the situation. I understand. And I'm willing to give you the space you need. They were silent for a moment, before Rebecca stood up and walked to the window. She looked outside, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I'm going to move away for a while. I need some time away from here, away from all this. Marcelo felt a pang of pain, but he knew it was what was best for her. If that's what you need, then I support it. Rebecca turned to him, a look of determination on her face. I need to rebuild my life, Marcelo. And you need to find a way to deal with your pain without destroying others. He stood up, approaching her. I promise I'll try. She nodded, and for a brief moment, they shared a silent connection, a mutual understanding that although their lives would never be the same, there was the possibility of healing in the future. When Marcelo left Rebecca's house, he felt a strange sense of relief. He knew the road to redemption would be long and difficult, but he was willing to walk it. In the following days, he dedicated himself to resolving the issues that had been left behind during his trip. He also sought out Laura, wanting to resolve things between them. They met in a cafe, and the conversation they had was frank and painful. Laura, I want to apologize for what I did, he said, holding the coffee cup tightly. I used you to get back at Rebecca, and that was wrong. Laura looked at him, her eyes full of sadness. Marcelo, I fell in love with you. And finding out that it was all a lie, was devastating. He nodded, feeling the guilt weighing him down once again. I know. And I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back, but all I can do now is ask for forgiveness. Laura sighed, looking out the window. I don't know if I can forgive you, Marcelo. But I appreciate your honesty. They talked for hours, trying to find common ground where they could begin to heal their wounds. Although their future together was uncertain, they both knew they needed to move forward, somehow. As Marcelo walked back to his office, he reflected on the choices he had made and the consequences they brought. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, but he was determined to find a way to redeem himself, for both Rebecca and Laura. Marcelo, determined to find a way to deal with his pain and his choices, began to make significant changes in his life. He threw himself into his work, trying to compensate for his emotional turmoil with his dedication to his financial empire. However, each day at the office reminded him of the void he had created in his personal life. Rebecca, in turn, left for a friend's house in Boston, seeking a refuge where she could reconnect with herself and begin her healing process. She signed up for art courses, rediscovering a passion she had abandoned over the years. The distance from Chicago allowed him to see things from a new perspective, far from the painful memories he shared with Marcelo. Laura, still confused by everything that happened, decided to focus on her photography career. She began working on new projects, using her art as a way to express and process her emotions. Marcelo and Rebecca being apart was difficult, but she knew she needed this time alone to heal and move on. One day, while reviewing some documents in the office, Marcelo received an unexpected call. It was from an old friend of Rebecca's, someone he hadn't seen in years. "Marcelo, it's David. We need to talk. It's about Rebecca." Feeling a knot in his stomach, Marcelo agreed to meet David at a cafe in the city center. When he got there, he found David already waiting, with a serious expression on his face. "What happened?" asked Marcelo, sitting down. David looked at him, measuring his words. "Rebecca is trying to get back on her feet, but is having a hard time. She thinks about you constantly. Perhaps a conversation between you could help." Marcelo sighed, feeling the weight of guilt. "I tried to talk to her, David. But I think I just made her more confused." David nodded, understanding. "Maybe she needs more time. But I think she still loves you, somehow. And maybe you can find a way to move forward, together or apart, but in a healthier way." Those words stayed with Marcelo for days. He knew he needed to do something, but he was unsure of the best step to take. So he decided to write a letter to Rebecca. He spent nights reviewing every word, wanting it to be perfect, honest and capable of conveying everything he felt. Finally, he sent the letter to Rebecca's address in Boston, hoping that she would find some comfort in his words. In the letter, he apologized again, but also expressed his hope that they could both find peace regardless of the future of their relationship. Rebecca, upon receiving the letter, felt a wave of emotions. She read and reread every word, feeling Marcelo's sincerity. Although there was still pain, she also felt that he was genuinely sorry. He decided to respond, but before that, he wanted to meet with Laura, as he knew they needed to resolve their issues. Rebecca met Laura at a coffee shop in Boston. The two women embraced, feeling the tension and sadness of what they had lost. "Laura, I know that we were used by Marcelo in his revenge, but I want to resolve things between us. Our friendship was important to me, and I miss it." Laura looked at Rebecca, her eyes full of tears. "I feel it too, Rebecca. I'm sorry about everything. I truly believed that Marcelo was falling in love with me." Rebecca held Laura's hand. "I understand. And I want you to know that I don't blame you completely. We were both manipulated. But maybe we can forgive ourselves and move on." They talked for hours, venting and resolving their differences. At the end of the meeting, they felt that a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They decided they needed time to rebuild their friendship, but they were willing to try. Meanwhile, Marcelo continued to try to redeem himself in other ways. He began volunteering with charitable organizations, something Rebecca has always valued. Little by little, he began to find a purpose beyond his business, a way to fill the emptiness he felt. Weeks passed, and Marcelo finally received a response from Rebecca. In the letter, she thanked him for his words and expressed her desire to meet with him for one last conversation. She mentioned that, regardless of what happened between them, she wanted to find a way to heal the wounds and move forward. They arranged to meet in a quiet Boston park, far from the chaos of their lives in Chicago. When they saw each other, there was a moment of hesitation, but also of relief. They walked together, talking about everything that had happened, the hurts, the mistakes and the lessons learned. Rebecca talked about how distance helped her rediscover who she was and what she really wanted in life. Marcelo, in turn, spoke about his volunteer work and how it helped him find a new purpose. Although there was still a lot to be resolved, they both felt they were ready to start leaving the past behind. The following months brought significant changes for everyone involved. Marcelo and Rebecca continued their lives, physically separated, but both trying to find a way to move forward. Their last conversation in the park had been an important step towards healing for both of them, but the scars were still deep. Rebecca returned to Chicago but decided she needed a fresh start. She put the apartment up for sale and moved into a downtown loft near her new art gallery. Her work at the gallery became a source of joy and purpose, and she began to rebuild her social life, surrounding herself with new, supportive friendships. Laura, on the other hand, decided to accept a job offer in New York. Moving to the city that never sleeps represented a new opportunity for her to start over, far from the painful memories of Chicago. In New York, she became involved in an ambitious photography project documenting life on the city streets, which helped her find a new passion and purpose. Marcelo continued his volunteer work, but realized that something was still missing in his life. He missed Rebecca, and despite everything, there was still a glimmer of hope that one day they could reconcile. However, he knew he needed to give her the space and time she needed. One day, while Marcelo was in a business meeting, he received an urgent call from an unknown number. It was from the hospital. Rebecca had been in a serious accident, and he was the emergency contact. Marcelo left everything and rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Laura in the waiting room, pale and in shock. She had returned to Chicago to visit Rebecca and was with her at the time of the accident. Marcelo felt a wave of despair when he saw Laura, but he knew he needed to remain calm. "How is she?" he asked, his voice trembling. Laura looked at him, her eyes full of tears. "He's in surgery. Doctors said it's serious, but they're doing everything they can." Marcelo sat next to Laura, holding her hand as they waited for news. The hours dragged by, and every minute seemed like an eternity. Finally, the doctor appeared, with a serious expression on his face. "The surgery was successful, but Rebecca's condition is critical. We need to monitor her for the next 48 hours. It's a miracle she survived." Marcelo and Laura took turns at Rebecca's side, waiting for her to wake up. Waking moments were full of reflection and regret. Marcelo realized now, more than ever, how much Rebecca meant to him. Laura, in turn, felt a mixture of guilt and pain, wishing she could go back in time and change the course of her actions. Finally, after days of waiting, Rebecca opened her eyes. She was weak but conscious. When she saw Marcelo and Laura by her side, she smiled faintly. "You're here," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Marcelo held her hand, feeling a wave of relief. "We're here, Rebecca. Let's get through this together." The following days were dedicated to Rebecca's recovery. Marcelo and Laura supported her in everything, and during that time, the old wounds began to heal. Marcelo's constant presence made Rebecca realize how sorry he was and willing to change. A month after the accident, while Rebecca was recovering at home, Marcelo visited her with a proposal. "Rebecca, I know what I did was unforgivable, but I want to spend the rest of my life redeeming myself, if you'll let me. I want to rebuild what we broke, if there's still a chance." Rebecca, looking into his eyes, saw the sincerity and the pain. She knew the road to reconciliation would be long and difficult, but she also knew that she still loved him. "Marcelo, I don't know if we can go back to how we were before, but I'm willing to try. Let's take it one step at a time." They began attending couples therapy, trying to rebuild the trust and respect they had lost. Laura, realizing her role was over, decided to return to New York, but with a promise to stay in touch and support Rebecca from a distance. Time passed, and, little by little, Marcelo and Rebecca found a new way of being together. It was no longer the young, naive love of before, but a relationship based on understanding, honesty, and the desire to make it work. Rebecca's accident had been a turning point. Marcelo finally understood that true redemption lay not in revenge, but in becoming a better person, someone worthy of Rebecca's love and respect. And Rebecca, in turn, learned to forgive, not only Marcelo, but also herself. Life in Chicago went on, and although the scars of the past never completely disappeared, they became a part of who they were, reminders of a time that taught them the true meaning of love, forgiveness and redemption. And so, they moved forward, together, rebuilding a new life from the ashes of the past.